Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a absolutely fascinating, decades-long legal showdown over one of the most recognizable pieces of infrastructure in the Philippines, the light rail transit system, or the LRT. We're looking at a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court en banc to resolve a massive billion-peso mystery between two government bodies. And the craziest part? They were fighting over your tax pesos.
So let's dive right into the core question here. We all know how real estate works, right? You own property, you pay local property taxes. It's pretty straightforward. Millions of us ride the LRT every year, and its terminals sit on some incredibly prime real estate right in Pasay City. But does the Light Rail Transit Authority actually have to pay property taxes to the local government for that land? Well, as it turns out, the answer is a whole lot more complicated than a simple yes or no.
Part 1. The billion-peso tax standoff. To really grasp the stakes here, just look at the sheer timeline of the standoff. It's wild. This whole thing started way back in 1985 when Pasay City began assessing real estate taxes on the LRTA. And initially, the LRTA actually admitted liability and asked to pay in installments. But they didn't pay. That led Pasay to issue warrants to basically seize the properties. In 2000, the Supreme Court ruled against the LRTA. But then there was a stunning reversal 22 years later in 2022. How did that happen?
Well, instead of fighting over the exact peso amount of the taxes through standard administrative protests, the LRTA took a much bolder route. They filed a petition for certiorari and prohibition, completely bypassing the usual red tape. They weren't debating the math of the tax bill anymore. They were fundamentally challenging Pasay City's legal authority to tax them at all. They claimed absolute tax exemption.
Which brings us to Section 2, Business or Government Entity, the LRTA's identity crisis.
This entire case basically hinges on a legal identity crisis. I mean, what exactly is the LRTA? Is it a government-owned or controlled corporation, known as a GOCC, or is it a government instrumentality? It's a crucial distinction because if it's a GOCC, kind of like a regular business owned by the state, it pays local taxes. But if it's an instrumentality, meaning an agency of the national government endowed with corporate powers, it is entirely tax-exempt. To figure this out, the court looked directly at the LRTA's charter. Out of its 500 million peso authorized capital, something vital stands out. It is fully subscribed by the Republic of the Philippines. The capital isn't divided into shares of stock at all. There are absolutely zero private shareholders. It has no members. Well, no members like a non-stock corporation would have anyway. Therefore, legally speaking, it's not a corporation. Instead, the Supreme Court determined that the LRTA perfectly fits the definition of a tax-exempt government corporate entity under the GOCC Governance Act of 2011. By checking all the legal boxes, it's a government agency, not a corporation. It operates autonomously, and it runs transit. The LRTA was officially classified as a government instrumentality.
Let's look at Section 3, the airport precedent, and a pretty massive 2006 plot twist.
To understand that massive 2022 reversal for the train system we talked about earlier, we actually have to look at a completely different transit hub. In 2006, the Supreme Court issued a revolutionary decision regarding the Manila International Airport Authority. It established that just because an entity has a charter and operates a public utility, it doesn't automatically mean it's a taxable GOCC. This airport precedent was a total game changer. It was so powerful, it forced a complete re-examination of the old LRT ruling. The anchor of the whole argument really comes down to this specific reasoning from the court. When the law vests in a government instrumentality corporate powers, the instrumentality does not become a corporation. What does that mean in plain English? Basically, just because the LRTA has the power to sue someone or sign contracts to buy train cars, things a normal business does, that doesn't legally transform it into a taxable commercial business. Now, Pasay City definitely tried to fight this. They argued that because the LRTA is officially attached to the Department of Transportation, it's disqualified from being an independent instrumentality. But the court shot this down. Being attached to a department doesn't strip an entity of its operational autonomy. After all, the Ports Authority and the Airport Authority are also attached to the DOTR, and yet they remain completely independent and tax-exempt. And that brings us to Section 4, the final verdict. At this point, the court had to look at the physical, concrete LRT properties themselves. Do they actually belong to the state? They looked at Article 420 of the Civil Code, which defines property of public dominion. These are properties intended for public use, like roads, bridges, and ports.
Under the law, these properties are considered outside the commerce of man. That means they literally can't be sold off, levied, or taxed.
Now, you have to remember, a civil code written decades ago doesn't explicitly mention elevated light rail transit systems. But the court noted that railroads are of a similar nature with public roads. Both are man-made constructions built by the state to facilitate mass transportation. Because the LRT was constructed using the state's power of eminent domain to alleviate Metro Manila traffic, it is officially a property of public dominion.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Wait a minute. I buy a ticket to ride the LRT. They make money. And Pasay City argued the exact same thing. But the court clarified that charging a fare doesn't remove the public character of the train. Think of it like a toll road. The fare is really just an equitable user's tax paid by the people who actually use the facility, and it helps maintain it. It definitely doesn't make the LRT a private commercial enterprise.
But hold on, because there is one massive exception to this final verdict. While the tracks and the passenger terminals are completely tax-exempt, what happens when you buy a coffee at the station? The minute the LRTA leases a portion of its terminal to a private business, like a food stall or kiosk, the beneficial use of that space transfers to a taxable person. So those specific commercial spaces, they are fully taxable by Pasay City. The private business pays the tax, not the LRTA. Ultimately, by applying the local government code, the N-Bank decision voided all of Pasay's tax assessments and warrants of levy on the public transit properties. The rule is strictly set here. Local governments simply cannot tax the national government, or its instrumentalities. Doing so would just be taking money from one government pocket and putting it into another, without any sound policy reason. I want to leave you with this final thought about our public services. The LRT relies heavily on billions of pesos in national government subsidies just to operate every day. If local cities were allowed to tax these vital transit systems, the national government would just have to increase its subsidies to cover the tax bill. So when government entities battle over tax dollars, who really pays the price? It's ultimately you, the taxpayer, whose money is just being inefficiently shifted around. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.